Hi, Mind, Body, Spirit Summit community. I'm Courtney Riley. I'm one of the co-hosts of the Mind, Body, Spirit Summit, and I'm super excited to introduce you to the inspiring beacon of light that is Karina and Mirsky. Thank you so much for being here, Karina. Karina is an international yoga and meditation educator, retreat leader, and self-development coach. She is the director of Sangha Yoga Institute, a training school in Kalamazoo, Michigan. She has been teaching yoga since 1998 and is a senior teacher of Rod Stryker's Para Yoga. Karina also holds degrees in business and East-West psychology. She has served as a faculty member of the Himalayan Institute and adjunct professor at Antioch University and is an annual guest speaker in WMU's Holistic Health Department. Her years of teaching and coaching others, as well as her own experiences with burnout and cancer, have taught Karina the necessity of holistic self-care. Her depth of knowledge and lighthearted nature have inspired and uplifted thousands of lives. Karina has been featured in numerous publications, including Yoga International, of which she graced the Winter 2012 cover. Woo! In March 2008, Yoga Journal named her one of 21 top yoga teachers shaping the future of yoga in America. And basically, Karina, you're just a badass. That's true.
Thanks, Courtney. It takes one to know one.
You truly live, you live your yoga. So I'm super excited for everybody to have you here today. And because Karina can speak on so many different topics, we actually honed in on a topic that is kind of lighting her fire recently. And the topic is the yoga of relationships. So let's just jump on in. Let's jump into it.
Yeah,
So for you, Karina, what is the yoga of relationships, and why is the topic that is on your heart? Why is it on your heart for us to share with us today?
One of my goals as a yoga teacher is to take this ancient philosophy, this ancient spiritual philosophy, and actually decode it to make these concepts more accessible to and applicable to our modern life. So we know that yoga is an inward journey. You know, we do it to look at the inner landscape of the body and the mind and our energy, and we use tools like yoga postures, asanas, pranayama, meditation to sort of regulate or reshape that inner landscape so that we can cultivate a sense of inner peace. So yoga gives us the skill set to feel more at peace within ourselves. But life takes place in relationship to others. So it is in relationship to other people that we kind of get knocked off of that calm, steady center. So we need additional tools of consciousness to help us cultivate and maintain peace in our relationships, in our daily life. So the teachings of consciousness can help us to transform relationship dynamics as well as they can help us kind of transform internal dynamics. So we use some of those internal tools to gain more self-awareness so that we can observe our reactions and our assumptions, when we get triggered in interactions with others.
Right.
And we need tools to challenge our beliefs, to modify our behaviors. And we also need tools to cultivate conscious communication so that we can get our needs met in relationships, so that we can resolve conflicts in relationships, and so that we can effectively love others and feel loved by others.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Oh, it totally does. So you're mentioning personal reactions, assumptions, and beliefs. So why do we have these? And where do these come from?
It's a really good question. It's one that psychologists have been, asking for hundreds of years, right? And the yogis for thousands of years. I mean, the reality is that our experiences shape our reality, and they shape the lens in which we see the world through, and especially our pain stories. Our subconscious clings really tightly to times that we've experienced trauma or danger, or when we've been hurt or misunderstood or rejected, or we feel shame. The mind has a tendency to kind of focus on those negative things, and it's a very instinctual, it's built into our limbic system that, if you lived thousands of years ago and there was a giant hole in the earth between where you were sleeping and where the water source was, your mind had to remember that potential danger, right? So it might forget all the other details of the landscape, but it's going to remember where that giant hole is so that you don't fall in it in the dark. Right. So our minds, our neuroscience is proving all of this. That actually there's research that's talking, I just read recently about how our early childhood experiences actually shape the way the brain develops. Like the way that we see the world, the way that our thoughts formulate, the neuropeptide pathways guide us to kind of avoiding these potential dangers all the time, right? Yeah. So our psychological systems will stay in high alert in attempts to protect us from feeling any of these past negative experiences again. And we get triggered anytime we interpret that there's some kind of threat, whether it's real or whether it's perceived through the coloring of our past experiences. We get triggered or we don't get triggered based on our beliefs about ourselves and the world around us. And so if you had an early childhood experience, especially something repetitive, like maybe a neglectful parent, right, where you just never felt seen, you just never felt valued, you never felt like you were good enough to that parent, you're going to keep seeing potential pitfalls where that pain story might be proven true to you again and again. So like, let's say a friend just forgot to call you back, and all of a sudden it means something, right? All it means, the same thing that it meant from your, neglectful parent. It's like, this person doesn't care about me. And that might not be the case at all. That might not be true. There might not be any potential threat that this person has taken their care away from you because they missed the phone call. But it's so deeply embedded, in our brain even, that story could be true. So this is really where our triggers come from, our assumptions come from, these kind of core beliefs that were formed in us about our goodness or our lack of goodness, based on our past experiences. So yeah. Oh, there's one piece that I'll add before we move on, and we're going to come back to this later, but I feel like I'll just drop this little nugget right away. I have what I call the core question. Yeah. And one of the best ways that we can work with this is anytime we find ourselves reacting to something that someone did or didn't do, said or didn't say, that we watch our minds believe something about that. Right. And then we get upset. Mm-hmm. So the best thing that we can do, I'm just going to drop right in with practice. The best thing that we can do in those moments is ask this simple question. Does any other possibility exist besides what I'm believing is true right now? Does any other possibility in the entire universe exist besides my friend doesn't care about me, and that's why they didn't call me back? Could it be that maybe her phone died? Right. Could it be maybe that some emergency came up? Mm-hmm. Could it be maybe that there's a million different possibilities of why that could have happened? But is that core feeling that I had, this reaction, oh, she doesn't care, is that true? And so that has been, for me, the greatest tool I've had to get me out of the constriction. And in yoga, we call it klesha. Klesha is like a collapsing of consciousness into a state of suffering. Just, boom, she didn't call me back, and that's what it means. Right. So in that moment of when we feel that trigger, and that moment where we feel that constriction, that reaction, or that painful assumption starts to come up about what something someone did or said means, if we can default to this question, it automatically it creates space. Yeah. It automatically pulls us out of that trigger, out of that collapsed consciousness, and it opens up the space of possibility, and it unravels the tension. Yeah. Just like in your yoga practice on your mat, right? If you can make some space in your body and unravel some tension. And yes. I mean, I could totally see what you mean by those things that trigger us. And then suddenly we're so owned by it that if you could just have one question that could help pull you out of being taken over from it, a new world exists, right? and sometimes many new worlds. And, whether or not you ever process that with the person who you got triggered by, or whether you just kind of hold it for yourself, just doing that process facilitates healing. Just doing that process opens up space. It actually creates new dendrites in the brain, new neuropeptide pathways, where now there's a choice. My friend doesn't call me back. My old belief system was, because of my neglectful parent, that because I was neglected in this moment, it means this person doesn't care about me. Now I have another option. Well, it could also mean something that has nothing to do with how much this person genuinely cares about me.
Right, because in the past, that belief system probably served in some way, and then now it no longer serves. So it's like It's really allowing you this opportunity to become a conscious participant in your own life and then in your relationships.
Yeah. So, and you hear that about things that don't serve us anymore. And it's almost like it's gotten a little esoteric to me. I'm like, what does that mean, it doesn't serve me anymore? Well, I think what it means is that, for somehow, some way, the psychological system had to survive the conditions in which it grew up. Right? It had to accept and survive whatever there was there.
That hole that was between you and the water, you had to make sure to miss it. So you came up with ways to miss it.
Exactly. And in being so hyper focused on the hole, you might have missed that there was a sloth in the tree. Or you might have missed these other amazing things that were also in the landscape, available for you to be present to. But because the importance of staying out of danger trumped all of that, that is what the mind stays focused on. And we just have to remember that this is just the way our minds work, that nobody necessarily has to be bad or wrong just because we have these old stories and ways that we have to try to protect ourselves, and just recognize that there are plenty of things that we might have missed, because of our need to protect ourselves.
And it seems, that like our most intimate relationships are where the pain stories get the most triggered, where we have the most triggering. Can you speak a little bit about why our romantic partners seem to have the most power to upset us the most?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question, and I there's three kind of things that I've personally identified. I'm sure that there are others, but the first one is what we've already talked about a little bit, which is our family dynamics. They kind of get played out. We could talk Freud, we could talk old school psychoanalytics, and how we're basically marrying our father or marrying our mother or something like that, right? So there's like these dynamics that kind of get played out there, and that brings us back to the neuroscience and how those loops get triggered really, really easy when there's intimacy. And when there's some level of dependency and trust like we would have with our immediate family, right? But really, what I think we can work with more than just having the awareness of that and seeing where those dynamics play out is just recognizing that we're vulnerable in our most intimate relationships, like our loving partnerships, marriages. This is where we are most vulnerable. And because the more that someone knows about us, the more vulnerable we feel. And when we feel vulnerable, that's when our protective mechanisms start to go into high alert. And so we might find ourselves reacting to these imaginary threats, and that could be threats to our safety, physically, emotionally, our sense of security, and most importantly, I think our identity. That sometimes we're vulnerable because we've been seen so much, and then there's something called enmeshment. Are you familiar with this term, enmeshment?
A little bit, but I'd love for you to explain it.
Yeah, it's basically where my identity and your identity start to get blurry. So you mentioned in my bio that I speak to thousands of Western Michigan University students every semester. I've been doing that for 18 years. I present in this course called Holistic Health 1000. It's an introduction to holism. And I try to explain this concept of enmeshment to these students, and there'll be like 200 of them sitting in the room, and I'll say, okay, I can prove to you that you've been enmeshed. How many of you, by a show of hands, were dating someone and they said or did something stupid and you felt embarrassed? They did it, but you got embarrassed. And then they all raised their hand,
right.
And it's that. It's like this sense of, because we are culturally identified with one another in partnership, or even taken a last name in marriage, there's this blurring, this blending of identity where now all of a sudden the other person's thoughts, behaviors, and actions are somehow a reflection on us. Yeah. And so when we see our partner acting unskillfully, especially when they're acting unskillfully with us, and they're not doing it the way that we would do it, or they're not saying it the way that we would say it, then we get really, really triggered in that.
Well, completely.
It's like we can't give them space to be their own unique individual and hold a secure sense of our own individuality in the midst of whatever it is that they're doing or saying.
Oh, completely. I can think of how many times I've been at dinner tables with friends who are couples, and my female friend or male friends end up like kind of acting in a way that is not necessarily typical of them, and then the partner's covering up or the partner's doing something, and you can see how it's affecting them and their own identity. That makes it so clear. So with that, with this vulnerability and this enmeshment, how can we work with this? I mean, how can we work with this vulnerability and enmeshment in our lives?
Interestingly enough, it's kind of a paradox, because it's this same vulnerability that makes us so sensitive to being upset by our intimate partner is also the same vulnerability that allows us to feel most loved by them. Yeah. I watched an interview with Brene Brown maybe a year ago, and someone asked her what her definition of love is. And she said, love is not something that you give or you get. It's something that grows between two people when they allow themselves to be fully seen by each other. So there's that being seen part again. And so I would take this definition just one step further, and this is where I think we can start getting into some practice as well. And I would say that to love someone or to feel loved by someone is more than just being seen. It's genuinely accepting and having compassion for what is being witnessed in the other. And so to feel love is to be held in both understanding and compassion by the other. And the act of loving someone else is to genuinely want to know like what's there for them and accept whatever it is that's being revealed, no matter how difficult it is to do that, accept that that's what's there for them in this moment, and then just meet it with compassion. And the beautiful thing about approaching love in this way, with this kind of a definition, is that it helps us to feel safe within our own vulnerability, because we can kind of trust that that's the other person's intention is to hold us in that with compassion. And it also helps us to maintain our own individual identity, which helps with some of the enmeshment. It's like, okay, that's you, that's your experience. I accept that's what's there for you, and I have compassion for it. Right. Or vice versa. Like, it's like, okay, that's helping me to not stay enmeshed with it. And when it's coming from the other person, and when I'm offering that love to someone, it's helping me just say, okay, that's you. That's yours. That's okay.
So, and also inside of that, I identifying even in my own self that in a moment that might trigger me with my partner, like holding that compassion for myself about, like, or noticing me not wanting to be compassionate, right? Mm-hmm. Is kind of a first step in it too. Yeah. And so it's like almost having a relationship with your own self internally in the same way, so that then I can offer that to the person that I'm loving.
That's exactly right. Yeah. In NVC, nonviolent communication, they use a language where they say include yourself in the loop of awareness. So in yoga, we're always talking about how the five senses are dragging us around in the external world. You know, we're seeing and hearing things outside of ourselves. And so we're focused on the partner, on the other who's outside of ourselves. Right. And we kind of forget to keep checking in with our own internal experience so that we can be really aware of what's arising in me right now. Right. You know, and then tend to it, like you're saying, compassionately. Mm-hmm. And something else that just came up for me as you were speaking was, and I've used this in my coaching practice quite a bit, is helping people, especially couples, to recognize where there's a sense of inequality between them. And I don't mean inequality like this partner makes more money and this partner does more house chores. I mean equality in how much we are valuing ourselves and the other's experience, emotions, you know, being, how much we're valuing, and that we have to make sure that we are both valuing ourselves and the other equally. And that can look a lot of different ways, but it really stems from this, like you're saying, this ability to check in with ourselves, have compassion for what's there in our own story, be curious about what's happening for the other person, not making assumptions about it, but being curious about what's really there, being willing to hear it, even if it's not comfortable for us, and just going, wow, God, I'm so sorry that that's what's there for you.
Right.
So just creating that there's this feeling of equality is something that I'm really noticing is coming through a lot in my coaching practice right now. I'm seeing where there's either less value for someone on their own self, their own needs, their own feelings, or where there's less value for the partner because they don't feel like the partner's as good at something as they are, or whatever.
Right. And would you even say that it could even be a blind spot for the person?
Absolutely.
That like they didn't even in some ways know that a thought process could exist in the way that the partner holds the thought process around money or around, intimacy or around whatever it is. And so for them to even go, wow, I'm hearing you and witnessing you, and I didn't even know that world could exist.
Yes. Yeah. And when we don't know something exists, we don't value it.
Right. Because we haven't put that in the equation yet. So.
Yeah, exactly. So we need to also be really mindful about just taking our time and not speaking from these triggered parts of ourselves. Part of the work that I do is rooted in a Western psychotherapeutic intervention called internal family systems therapy.
Yeah.
I'm not a certified IFS practitioner, but I have a mentor who was a trainer in that model for years, and I've been with him for almost 20 years. And so I work in the model that we have coined parts work. It's Tom Holmes' model called parts work, but it's very similar to IFS if anyone is familiar with that. But IFS is based on this premise that we are a multiplicity of subpersonalities that all have these important roles within our psychological system. Some are there to help us manage and organize things. Some are there to help protect us from things. Some are there to be helpful to others. Some are there to carry painful beliefs from our past experiences. Some parts of us have these bad jobs to do, but that all parts of us are good in trying to help us in some way. And then the other aspect of the philosophy of the system is that we have another part of us, it's not a part, it's actually the center of consciousness or the centered self, which has certain qualities: calm, clear, curious, compassionate, confident, creative, courageous, all these wonderful C words that Dick Schwartz came up with. And one of the things that comes up in my coaching practice a lot with people in these moments of when we're getting really triggered is I say, okay, when you include yourself in the loop of awareness and you see what's arising for you, like let's say your partner or anyone did something that just made you really, really mad. And this is the example that I use. And I say, okay, so if this person said something really mean, and if you feel yourself getting triggered and you just fire off with them, F you, right?
Right.
And that is you speaking from the anger. Now, anger has a psychological function, which is to set boundaries. It's to say, okay, hey, this isn't okay. Right. So, we don't want to just do away with anger completely, but we don't have good results in communication when we speak from it. Right. So the option that I propose to people is, okay, you're feeling this anger arise in you. You want to lash out with the big F you. So what if you just named your experience instead? What if you, from self, spoke for the part rather than from the part? So that might look a little something like, wow, I can feel my heart beating faster and my breath is getting a little constricted. I can feel myself getting really angry and I'm really having a strong reaction to what you're saying. And I feel like maybe we need to just take a break right now so that I don't say something I'm going to regret. Right. So instead of putting the anger out onto the other, you simply name and own what's there for you. And then the other person doesn't get reactionary to that. Then it doesn't become a FU battle back and forth. Right. Then it stops right there, right? And then the real boundary can be talked about at a later time, right? From a calm, cool, collected place, right?
Well, it sounds similar to like when you're talking about the glacier, like the collapsing that happens, you just created space again by including the self.
Exactly. Exactly. And to me, this is all the work of yoga, because what teaches us to, monitor that internal landscape?
Right.
Our yoga practice does. We're feeling sensations in our postures. We're noticing what's happening during our pranayama practices, whether or not our breath or whether or not our heart rate is accelerating and we need to kind of back off of how long we're holding the breath. Or, we in our meditation practice, we watch the contents of the mind and what is compelling us and what is distracting us. And, we see what's there. So these tools of yoga are really, I heard you say, we were having a little preliminary conversation before we started the interview. And I heard you say, this really sounds like how we can take our yoga off the mat and into life. Yeah. And that's exactly right. Why are we doing the yoga on the mat if it's not cultivating within us capacities to live our lives more fully and more peacefully and more consciously and more responsibly, and supporting the continuous evolution, not just of our own Kundalini, but of the collective consciousness of all of our relations, because we can bring this consciousness, we can bring these tools into business relationships, into personal relationships. The possibilities are really endless, but to me, this is really just about living a life of love. It's really like you said, having that internal awareness and compassion. It's okay, this is how I love myself in relationship to this conflict with this person at work. This is how I love myself in relationship to, not having this need met from my partner. Mm-hmm. And then when we learn how to effectively become self-aware and self-responsive, mm-hmm. and self-loving, it's so much easier to do that for other people. It's so much easier when you recognize your own triggers to just understand that other person also has triggers. They also have a pain story. They also have, a brain that developed in a certain way. And it just becomes easier to have that compassion. It becomes easier to live a life of love. Yeah?
Right. And because you were mentioning that we need these certain specific tools for cultivating conscious communication to effectively love and feel loved by others. So what are some of those actual tools themselves?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. Just kind of going back to Brené Brown's original definition of love, to feel love is to feel seen, to feel heard, to feel appreciated and valued, right? So I have found in my own personal loving relationships, one technique that has just been amazing for me personally. Are you familiar with the book about the 4 love languages?
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah. So I'm sure a lot of our listeners are maybe aware of it as well. But one of the love languages, one of the ways that people feel loved is called words of affirmation. Mm-hmm. And I think, the book might mislead some of us to thinking that we only have 1 or 2 love languages. And the reality is that, we have them all. And we might value more of them if we spend time cultivating them. So for me, words of affirmation is huge. I'm so big on language, as I'm sure you can tell. But the practice that I think is really useful is, I just call it simply, it's loving acknowledgement. It's an acknowledgement practice. And so it's a practice of making a commitment. This is with loving partnership now that I'm talking about. Right. It's making a commitment to naming what you see that is good in the partner, what you see their efforts, you see where they're trying to do something, you see what their good intentions are, you see how hard that they have been working or how much they might be suffering, but you acknowledge, you actually say, and this is how it can often start. Maybe you're talking to your lover on the phone and they tell you something about what a hard day they had and how they had this, really uncomfortable interaction at work, but then you could see how well they handled it. And I would say to my partner then, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge how skillful you were in that interaction. And just taking that moment and just say, and this is always how it starts. I just want to take a second to acknowledge this goodness in you. Or I just want to take a second to acknowledge that I noticed that you put the dishes in the dishwasher. Right. Thank you. I noticed that you did that. Now, whether it was his turn to put the dishes in the dishwasher or not doesn't matter. It's You just acknowledge when the good things are done. You acknowledge when you see things that you appreciate. You acknowledge when you see the other person doing well, and it makes us feel so seen and so valued and so loved. It just does. But it could also be applied, in business relationships as well. When a really good leader is going to be someone who wants to uplift and praise and support and encourage, their subordinates. So taking that time to acknowledge, even if they're doing their job and that is their job, you don't have to acknowledge that they're doing their job. That's their job. But if you see them doing it and you see them doing it well, or you see them doing it with joy or with attention or something, that you just take that moment to acknowledge and name it. And people will stay with you if they feel appreciated, if they feel seen. So that's one of the tools that is very simple to implement. Is just to start trying to notice. And that's a mindfulness practice. It's really about paying attention. It's really about noticing and looking for the goodness in other people, looking for it and naming it when we see it. So that's one of my favorites.
That's awesome. I mean, last night I can think about the fact that I had to work and we have a 4-month-old, and on my way home, I checked in really quickly before I started driving home, and my husband answered on FaceTime, and he already had our little girl in the bathtub. And because he knew what time bath was supposed to be, and I was going to be later than that, and he did it, and I acknowledged that, and then even later on acknowledged it, and I could see where that was like, he was loving me by acknowledging that I had wished before for this time to be a commitment for her bath, and then I acknowledged that he did it. And suddenly it was just such a loving moment.
Yes.
And, that's awesome.
And how simple, because all you're doing is naming.
Yeah.
All you're doing is acknowledging. All you're doing is saying thanks, or I just want to acknowledge you for doing this. It really meant a lot to me. Or I just want to acknowledge how skillful you were in that conversation with your friend today. Like, I overheard you on the phone and good job. That kind of praise. I mean, you want to talk about how to make a man feel like a man? Right. Acknowledge him.
Like, you took care of me in that moment. Like, that was awesome.
Yes, that's right. Yes, absolutely. And of course, it's not gender specific. This is certainly true for all of us. But, I often will coach women, who are struggling with their men. I'm like, well, how often do you praise him? Right. For his goodness. How often do you tell him he's doing a good job, or do you really only tell him that he's not doing the laundry right, and he's not doing the dishes right, and he's not picking up the kids right, or how much of the conversation is focused on what is not working or what is negative versus how much of the conversation is focused on, the acknowledgement of the things that are good, that are working. Right. Yes, it's powerful.
And that feels good for myself too when I'm acknowledging him for that. So it's this reciprocal situation as well.
And do you know why it feels good for you when you acknowledge him for that?
How come?
Because of enmeshment.
Oh,
so when you acknowledge his goodness, you feel good too.
Right. So that's like that's the good part of the enmeshment piece.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Because when we see our partner doing something, skillful, we feel proud. Yeah. That's the joy of it. When they're happy, we feel happy. Right. There's a term in the polyamorous communities called compersion, which means being happy for the other's happiness. So in polyamorous relationships, there's multiple loving partners, not just a single loving partner. Yeah. So it's instead of jealousy, it's kind of like the opposite of the continuum of jealousy. It's called compersion. So instead of being jealous that my partner is with one of their other partners, you feel happy that they are happy. Right?
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, my mind blown.
That could be that's like a whole other interview right there.
That's a whole other interview, absolutely. But it's a really beautiful concept to think about, these continuums between how much criticism are we giving versus how much praise, how much jealousy we're feeling versus how much compersion. I really like looking at those scales, and again, looking for where's the balance, where's the tipping points, what's missing that would make a difference in this relationship.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And
good.
And I know that you have, so what other tools? Yeah.
So I had another one that I had taken a little note on. And this is one that I think might be really fun for us to do an example of. I know that in this conference you're offering experiential pieces. And so I thought it might be fun for you and I to do an exercise together where we could demonstrate what reflective listening is.
Great. Totally.
This is a very powerful tool, Courtney. I mean, I use it with couples counseling stuff all the time.
Sure.
Is, again, if we come back to this idea that when we feel secure, we feel confident, we feel loved and cared for, when we feel seen and heard. So often in conversations, somebody will share what's there for them, especially if it's kind of a conflicting, it's about conflict in some way. Someone will share what's there for them, and the other person will do one of two things. Try to talk that person out of how they feel, right? Or try to relate something in their own experience. But what we miss by jumping to one of those two things right away is we miss acknowledging what that person just said, and we miss the opportunity to make them feel seen, heard, and cared about. Mm-hmm. So you and I will do a little example of that, but I'm sure you can think of a million times when you've shared something and you just want to be heard. Like I wrote a piece a while back, I think it was like a Facebook note or something about someone saying, "Oh, I'm having such a fat day." I just feel so fat today. And like our immediate impulse is to be like, "Oh no, you're beautiful," right? Or, "Oh my God, I know what you mean. I ate a whole can of, a whole thing of Haagen-Dazs last week and now my pants are tight," So it's like we do that. Right. But we miss the opportunity to say, "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry you're feeling about that yourself I'm so sorry that you're feeling about yourself that way today." I'm sorry that that's what you're feeling. So you're just having a fat day.
Yeah, right.
And just holding it, acknowledging it, saying the words back verbatim. "Oh, so you're having a fat day? I'm sorry."
Yeah.
And then there's nothing, almost like it goes away in that moment. It's almost like the person is like, "Oh, well, I guess I'm done with that suffering now."
Right. Or I could see then you get to also see then what's even underneath that piece.
Yeah.
So
sure.
Like if someone just goes, instead of doing what they're trained with, like if their mom would always go, "Oh no, honey, da-da," or would relate, then instead of relating on something negative with somebody and feeling like that means that's relationship, or
ruminating,
right, or ruminating on it, that suddenly they go, "Oh wait, so is she saying that I am?" You could go to that whole other place, and then that allows them to start seeing what's maybe even underneath it too. Is that true? Yeah.
Absolutely. But when we just reflect it back to someone, right, absolutely, they see what they're bringing.
Yeah.
So if I say, "Oh, I'm just having such a fat day," and then you empathetically say, "Oh, honey, you're having a fat day today? I'm so sorry you feel that way." Then all of a sudden I'm like, "Oh shit, that's who I'm being right now." Yeah. I'm being that person. Uh-huh. Is that who I want to be?
Right.
And then you just shift out of it. It really helps, again, create space. Right. And all we're doing is empathetically reflecting back what the person said, using their words verbatim, but with compassion. Right. So we'll do a little experiment with that, at the end of the talk. But so these are two tools that I think are really easy to integrate into our relationships. They just take a little bit of mindfulness. Like we just have to make a commitment to saying, "Okay, I'm going to bring more acknowledgement of goodness into the communication with my partner, with my family member, with my colleague. I'm just going to try that and see if it transforms the dynamic." And oftentimes just that alone will do it. Yeah. But then anytime we're trying to really be with someone with their feelings, the reflective listening practice it's fail-proof. It's amazing.
Right. So, because then it comes to a whole other level where we're trying to resolve a conflict, right, to get our needs met. Or, do you have specific tools for that?
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to, remember I said I dropped a little nugget right at the beginning. I'm going to come back to this core question. We have to check our own expectations, assumptions, and beliefs. That is part of the work of yoga, is monitoring what's going on in this mind and saying to myself, "Okay, what am I assuming is true, right? What do I believe here? What have I been expecting? Was that even a reasonable expectation? Does any other possibility exist?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, was it reasonable for me to have that expectation?
Right.
Right? Is this assumption that I'm making? Does any other possibility exist besides this assumption that I'm making?
Mm-hmm.
Or what I'm believing is true? Like, that is a really important, really, really important piece, right? So first, if we want to resolve conflict, we got to check ourselves. That's number one.
Yeah.
And then number two, when there's genuinely an activating event, something happened, it made you feel a certain way, it brought up needs that were not being met not being met in the interaction, then we need to find a way to make those requests. We need to have some tools for being able to deliver information or make requests of other people in a way that recruits listening. Okay, so certain ways that we approach conversations shut down the listening of the listener. They automatically go on the defense. They automatically, just tune out, or they start, creating their own interpretations in their mind as rebuttal. So what we want to do is we want to invite people into hearing what's here for us. We want to recruit their listening, which means that we have to be very careful not to automatically put them on the defense so it shuts down their listening. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah.
So one of the tools that I found that is just incredible in being able to do this is Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication, or NVC for short. Are you familiar?
No.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
NVC is a whole complex, system that you can study and spend years, learning about. Yeah. But one of the most simple and effective tools that I've extracted out of it is just a simple formula. And you can write it out ahead of time. And I do suggest that people do take the time to write out the 4 pieces and identify them. So there's 4 components. There's the activating event. Okay. Let's say partner didn't show up on time to pick up the kid from school.
Right.
Okay, that's the activating event. That's a fact.
Okay.
That really happened. Wow. No interpretation. It wasn't like, I feel like maybe you didn't get there on time. It's like, no, he was supposed to be there at 3 p.m. and he didn't get there till 3:40. That is a fact. Nobody can dispute it. Okay, so that's what's called the activating event. It has to be a fact that nobody could dispute. You're writing it down. The second part is to identify how it made you feel. Okay, so, and feelings are never directed at the other person in a you statement.
Got it.
Feelings are always owned completely by the person. That made me feel confused. I felt shocked. I felt scared. I felt, so you own the feeling. So the feeling is not, you made me feel scared, or you made me so pissed off, or it's like, I felt really angry. I felt really shocked and confused. I felt sad. So you take ownership over the feeling that you're having. Yeah. And then you can sort of extrapolate from that. What is the core need for me that's not being met? And so my need is, I need to trust that when it's his turn to pick up our child from school, that it's going to be done on time. I need to feel safe and secure in that. That's a need that I have. I need to be able to not be anxious about that. I need to feel safe, right? I need to feel secure and in trust with my partner. That's a need that I have.
Right.
So when we're piecing these things together, we often start with presenting the need. I have a need to feel safe and secure and fully in trust with my partner that my daughter will be safe and picked up from school on time.
Right.
When you were 40 minutes late picking her up on Tuesday, I felt shocked, confused, angry, upset. And then the final 4th piece is the request. And it usually starts with a statement like, would you be willing to? Would you be willing to text me ahead of time if you know you're going to be late and we need to make other arrangements? Something like that. Does that make sense?
100%. I'm writing it down because I'm like, I'm going to use this.
Yeah. So we have the core need that's not being met.
Yeah.
We have activating event in which it wasn't being met. Right. We have the feelings of ownership. We own our feelings about what came up, and then we make a request that starts with, would you be willing to? This recruits listening because it doesn't automatically say, you didn't pick her up and you're an asshole and I'm so mad at you and you got to text me when you're going to be late. Like, it doesn't just put it all on them.
Right. And it doesn't do this. It does this, like you're saying. It opens up the space.
It opens a space. It creates space where the other person can hear. Because what we often forget is that when we need to confront someone about something, they probably already have some guilt or some shame, or they kind of know that they've already maybe messed up. And so when we add fuel to that, then of course their own protective mechanisms are going to kick in, and they're going to go in self-preservation mode. They're going to go in the defense, and they're going to say and do things that are not even aligned with what they're genuinely feeling because they feel threatened.
Completely. And then communication is shut down versus resolving it and, like you're saying, opening it up.
Yeah. And in my experience, when we present information like this, usually that partner would say, like, oh man, I'm so sorry. I totally, messed this one up. Yes, I will definitely text you in the future. Usually you just get your need met.
Right. And especially because if you can name what it did for you, someone who's in that partnership with you, they don't necessarily want you feeling that way. It's when you start to do the blaming. I get that.
Exactly. And, we don't even intend to blame sometimes, but we're so used to using you statements. You made me feel this way.
Right.
I
felt this way.
When you did this, and it's more like, okay, here's my need. When this happened, this is how I felt. Would you be willing to do it differently next time?
Well,
and, it's really just a way to, talk about difficult things. Mm-hmm. It gives us a tool, to talk about difficult things that are hard to talk about,
Changing, and I love it, changing U's to I's, is a great tool inside of that as well. Yeah,
it's really helpful. These are like little simple adjustments, which is what I wanted to bring to this conversation. Was not like I didn't want to bring, you've got to go to therapy and, work. I was like, here's some simple tools that are easily incorporated into our relationships that can make them more positive, more compassionate, more spacious, more loving, more understanding, and just flow better. Like, where everybody feels good about the kind of interaction that we're having, even if we're having an interaction about a difficult topic.
Right. Because I can think about just even comparing that to being on the mat, those little adjustments that you sometimes make are like the biggest ahas that provide that opportunity to witness yourself. And if you can do it with compassionate eyes, you can gain the insight to go, oh my gosh, if I just changed this way, suddenly my breath completely opens up, or a certain emotion percolates out. And what's that all about? So
or this makes me a little bit uncomfortable, but if I just use this block, now all of a sudden I have this space. If I just use this tool, now it's so easy. All I had to do was put a block under my hand, and now all of a sudden I have all this extra space. So that's kind of what this is. These are like the blocks and straps of relationships. Here's a little tool that might make this better.
Yeah. I will be using it. And I know that you mentioned that reflective exercise. Would you want to go into that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think it could be a lot of fun. And so it usually helps if you don't give too much information all at once. So if the story's too long, then the person listening will have a hard time remembering the details to reflect back verbatim. So it's good if it comes in kind of little chunks if you're telling a longer story. So to give the partner an opportunity to reflect back, because it really is a practice. It's like you say something to me, and then I repeat your words back to you, not with interpretation,
right?
Like not with my own, oh yeah, I totally understand because of this. Not like not relanguaging what you're saying. Try to use your words exactly the way you did. And so it's easier to do that if the snippets of information that come are a little shorter, especially in the beginning when you're learning to harness this kind of attention.
Okay.
But is there a story? Is there something that happened that you want to talk about? Maybe your birth story?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about my birth story. I could talk about just, a really simple story. It could be, being at the dentist, or it could be my birth story, whichever. What do you think it would be more useful?
Either one. I mean, the practice is really I just want people to be able to see how I use your words back to you with
so then
empathy.
Because this is still, yesterday I had to go get a root canal.
Okay. Yesterday you got a root canal.
Right. And already before I even left the house, I could feel like I was shaking. I was getting anxious. And I was naming that to myself, but I also knew that I had had past traumas with dental work.
Okay. So even as you were driving to the office, you were already starting to feel anxious, and you became aware of some of these past traumas that you've had at dentist offices in the past.
Completely. And then even when I walked in, I even told the front desk lady that I'm like, so do people come in here anxious? Do you think I'm a little bit anxious? And I could see myself already wanting to be validated for the fact that that it's okay, or that would be taken care of there, right?
Yeah. So you were so anxious that you needed someone to validate that for you. So right away, when you first got there, you even brought that to the receptionist and said, is it normal that people are anxious coming in? Yeah, because you really needed someone to hold that with you.
Yeah, completely. And so then I ended up getting back there, getting into the chair. The dentist came in. She was so lovely. She was amazing. She's actually an endodontist. And I knew I was in a very professional space, but I could still feel the anxiety building and me turning on my witness consciousness with it, but still having a really hard time making any shifts with it.
Okay. So even though the endodontist was very nice and made you feel really comfortable, you could still feel that anxiety was arising. Yeah. So what did you do with it?
So then I ended up, I even told the endodontist that I was anxious, and she then began working on my tooth, and my entire body went into contraction. Mm-hmm. I started hyperventilating. Tears started flowing down my face. And all the time, I'm actually watching myself have this experience, but it was hard for me to bring my yogic tools into that experience for some reason. I was so triggered. I was actually able to watch myself still having it, which I thought was curious, but I could not harness the tools to then to then dissipate or stop the charge, right?
Yeah, so what it sounds like I'm hearing you say is that the minute that she started working on you, like you just felt this total constriction, the tears were running down your face, and you could see and witness that it was happening, but you couldn't stop it. You couldn't recruit your yogic tools in that moment. Yeah. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry that happened.
Thank you. And so in the end, she ended up realizing too that there's not necessarily enough tooth there, so they couldn't even finish the root canal.
Oh.
So I ended up walking out of there with, just a little cap, temporary cap on it, and, completely numb face, and noticing that it was a completely triggering experience.
So you, at the end of it, you walked out of there, and there wasn't even enough tooth to finish the root canal, so you walked out with a cap and this swollen face, and it wasn't even a resolved issue.
No.
And you went through all of that.
Yeah. But what I did, which then I was a little bit proud of, is I thought, okay, so there's something more, obviously, underneath this than just going and sitting in a dentist chair, right?
Okay.
So I ended up calling a few of my support team, I'll say, and yesterday went and saw two of them to digest what was the triggering event about it. Mm-hmm. And so in the end, something that was a really hard experience offered a lot of healing. So
it sounds like you were able to identify an opportunity to take this negative experience and turn it into healing by actually processing it after it happened, because you recognized that there was something deeper there to look at.
Yeah.
Great job.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's kind of how that works.
Mm-hmm.
How was that for you?
That was good. I mean, it was definitely, it was so nice because I definitely relate to the desire to be heard as a way of feeling loved. And in that, and having you reflect back just what you were hearing from me allowed me to know what was being shared was being taken in. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was also different. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
It's different, which anything different can feel a little bit like, oh, that feels good. This is just about me and my story and not necessarily relating in an old way I'm used to relating in.
Or interpreting what you were saying. I tried really hard, and it's still a practice for me. I've been doing it for years, but it's really hard to not put words in the other person's mouth, and then they end up having to say, well, no, that's not exactly what I meant.
Right.
And you never want to hear, no, that's not exactly what I meant when you're practicing empathetic reflective listening. You want to hear your own words. That's why I didn't say crying. I said tears running down your face, because that's what you said. Right? Yeah. I wanted you to feel completely known in your experience.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's just how we often, that's how we feel cared for. You know, we don't want to have to be in defense when we're trying to explain something to someone and be like, no, that's not it. You're not getting it.
Right. You're not understanding. You're not hearing me. Right. That's
right.
Yeah. We want to be heard.
Yeah. So it's a technique, and you can practice it, with a partner in like I said, little snippets are best until you learn how to harness the attention for longer and longer, parts of the story. Right. But, every time I have coached someone to use this, I get texts, I get phone calls like, oh my God, it worked.
Right. Like I actually did it.
For once, the conversation didn't go on for 2 hours with her trying to re-explain to me, because I just used her words, and then she felt heard, and then it was done.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Totally. And it'd be interesting to be on the other side of it, trying that out and seeing how that felt for yourself too, right? Like watching yourself wanting to relate the certain way, or watching yourself wanting to interject with a disagreement is part of the practice as well, I could see.
It is absolutely a practice of staying present, really paying attention, listening when it's your turn to listen and reflect, not formulating those responses, not letting the mind drift away from the focus of your present moment attention, which is your partner, which is why we feel so loved when we have that full, or not even loved, cared for, genuinely just cared for, because I do this with my clients. This is based in Rogerian therapy, the work of Carl Rogers, where he would have clients come in, and that's pretty much all he would do is reflective, empathetic listening, unconditional positive regard. But he was so present with the people that they would work through their own stuff. Like you told me the whole story from the most traumatic parts of it to the resolution that you came to on your own.
Right.
You didn't need me to coax that out of you. Yeah. As I just held the space for you with present attention and affirmed your story step by step, you got to the resolution yourself.
Right. And that's where the healing is. It's just so beautiful.
Yes.
So, go ahead.
No, and this is where when we feel acknowledged too. I had a partner who is a master of this reflective listening, and even once in a while, he would jump into his, fix it part, like helper part. And then I would say, honey, I just need you to reflect back to me right now. And then he'd be like, oh, sorry. And then he would do it. And it was like, okay, good. I feel heard. So we can request this of our partners too, if we have practiced in it together. And then if we find that it's not happening and we're getting triggered, we can simply request it.
Right.
And it becomes a really useful tool.
A really useful tool. And then to acknowledge also when we do slip into those old ways of being able to name it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because we include ourselves in the loop of awareness, and we hold ourselves and our needs and our feelings in equality with our partner or whomever it is. And, we just use some of these tools of acknowledgement and reflective listening. We can use that with our children. We can use that with our coworkers. It just brings more enlightened conversation into the world, more uplifted conversation.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if people would love to continue working with you or get to know you better. I know that you have an offering for the community, which I'd love for you to let them know about.
I do, thanks. If you go to my website, sanghayoga.com, it's SANGHAYOGA, sanghayoga.com, and you go to my private coaching page, you can read a little bit about the distance coaching, the telecoaching that I do. I work via Skype or Facebook video chat or even on the phone with some clients. And we can talk about anything, like anything at all. And any kind of struggles that they're going through, if it's something that has to do with relationships, great. And I'm offering a 50% discount on a coaching session for just for people that are participating in the conference. So it's normally, I think it's 95 online, so it's like 45, something like that for a discount. If you email me through the website by June 1st.
By June 1st. Perfect.
Yeah,
that's
by
awesome.
June 1st.
And all this information.
Mention this interview, of course.
This interview, of course. Yeah. And all that information will be on our website as well. That's so awesome. You've been so lovely, and you're such a light, and you carry such a depth and wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Courtney. I'm really delighted to have been here. And if people want to stay connected with me, I'm having a lot of fun with Instagram right now. And I'm actually doing the majority of kind of little short teaching. So I'm teaching the most on Instagram right now. So it's awesome. Karina and Mirsky, KarinaAYN So perfect. I'd love to connect with folks there too.
You got it. All those links are inside of the website as well. And definitely you guys will benefit by staying in touch with Karina, truly. So, thank you, Karina.
Thank you, Courtney. Take care.